If the entire US economy had only 90 days left to decide its survival, what would you do? The tariff war with China is no longer just a trade game. It has become a deadly gamble. Will America manage to turn the tide in time, or will it fall into a prolonged spiral of recession? These are not just 90 days of negotiation. They are 90 days that could determine the very future of the American economy. You probably still remember that critical moment in May 2025 when the whole country seemed to be holding its breath. That was not just an ordinary date. It was 90 life or death days. The US government and China had just signed an agreement to temporarily pause the high tariffs, only for 3 months, to come back to the negotiating table. A brief window, but one filled with hope to revive a plummeting economy. What happened before that? Imagine running a business importing goods from China. Everything was going smoothly, until the US government decided to slap on a record-high tariff of 145%. Yes, you read that right. Nearly all Chinese goods entering the US were hit with crushing tariffs. The result was predictable. Countless companies couldn't afford raw materials anymore, production lines stalled, prices soared, and a wave of business closures swept through like a domino effect. Even when the US and China agreed to temporarily ease tensions, the tariffs were only reduced to 30%. It might sound lighter, but it's still many times higher than the rates before the COVID-19 pandemic. With tariffs at this level, production and import costs continue to weigh heavily on businesses' shoulders. The big question is, can the US economy flip the script in such a short 90 days? Can it stabilize supply chains, lower consumer prices, and restore market confidence in time? This is no longer about just a few isolated industries. It's a final stress test for the entire economy. A temporary stay of execution for millions of struggling businesses, but also the last chance for America to prove it can rise again after a devastating blow to its production and trade systems. Before the tariff pause deal, the situation hit the US transportation and trade sectors like a violent storm. A staggering tariff rate of 145% left businesses feeling trapped, too scared to import from China, America's #1 trading partner for years. The result? It's hard to believe, but true. The number of shipping containers traveling from China to the US plunged dramatically, down by 50% in May 2025 compared to the same month the previous year. To break it down further, shipments to the West Coast dropped by 20%, while the East Coast saw nearly an 18% decrease. What did that mean? Container ships had nowhere to dock because goods were essentially frozen, warehouses stood empty, and supermarkets started running out of essential products. The global supply chain, the lifeblood of the economy, was choking, pushing the US into a never-before-seen goods crisis. And that was just the beginning. Once tariffs dropped from 145% to 30%, American businesses surged to place orders again. But instead of relief, it sparked massive chaos in an already fragile supply chain. Major ports like Los Angeles, Long Beach, and Houston quickly became gridlocked. The problem wasn't just a shortage of space on ships. It was a shortage of empty containers, trucks, and even drivers to get goods into customers' hands. The outcome? Even with early orders, goods took 2 to 3 months to reach store shelves, leaving American consumers waiting longer and facing severe shortages. A supply chain already on shaky ground was pushed once again to its breaking point, dragging the US economy into a chaotic spiral with no clear end in sight. The US transportation sector is facing an unprecedented crisis, and the numbers tell a grim story about what's coming. According to FreightWaves, total imports into the US dropped by 25% in June 2025 compared to the same month the year before. This led to a 5% drop in nationwide road freight traffic. The fallout? Hundreds of small transportation businesses, the backbone of the industry, couldn't survive and declared bankruptcy. Layoffs of drivers and logistics workers spread widely, leaving many families without their main source of income. There's no denying how vital transportation is to the American economy. With a massive size of nearly $1 trillion making up about 5% of the US GDP, it's the heart that keeps goods flowing smoothly from factories to stores and into consumers' hands. But here's the catch. This industry heavily depends on imported goods. When the global supply chain breaks down, transportation freezes up, and retail, manufacturing, and exports get hit hard right after. Put simply, the transportation sector is standing at the edge of a cliff. If this situation drags on, One more slip could pull not just the industry, but the entire US economy into a deep crisis. This is a red alert flashing for the whole nation's economic system. Imagine you're an everyday shopper, buying groceries and essentials for your family each month. Now the cost of living is rising so fast it's hard to keep up. Before May 2025, import taxes hitting 145% on goods from China added nearly $4,000 a year to each American household's expenses. That was a massive shock, forcing many families to tighten their belts. Even though the New Deal cut the tax down to 30%, this is still twice as high as before the trade war under President Trump. That means inflation pressure remains intense and consumers are still paying far more than before. It's not just taxes. Industries like leather goods, clothing, furniture, building materials, chemicals, sanitary equipment, agriculture, steel and aluminum are all feeling the heat. Shipping delays push up logistics costs, which then hike retail prices. Simply put, everything from your clothes to the materials for building a house is more expensive, making everyday life tougher for Americans. Now, let's look at businesses caught in an incredibly tough spot. Before, importing from China was the cheapest, fastest option. But with soaring taxes, that cheap solution is no longer possible. Many companies are trying to shift to markets like Southeast Asia, India, or Latin America. But the price to pay is steep. Poor infrastructure, small-scale production, and a shortage of skilled workers all create big hurdles. Moving factories isn't a quick fix either. It can take 2 to 5 years and hundreds of millions of dollars. What happens then? Small businesses and startups with limited funds and resources quickly collapse under pressure. Big companies don't fare much better. They cut production, lay off workers, and pause R&D investments. Even budgets for advertising and media get slashed, heavily hitting marketing, communication, and creative industries. In short, American businesses are stuck in a damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario, unable to rely on the old path, but not yet ready to walk a new, stable road forward. This isn't just about numbers or reports, it's about how people and businesses feel. As prices skyrocket, consumers get anxious, tightening their wallets and cutting back on spending. The result? Stockpiles of unsold goods pile up in warehouses, adding more pressure on businesses. Growing fears of a recession push more people to save rather than spend, a vicious cycle that's hard to break. What about businesses? They're more cautious than ever. Hiring freezes, halted or canceled production expansions become the new norm. Commercial real estate, heavily dependent on investment and demand, gets caught in the storm, making the economic mess even worse. On a bigger scale, the Federal Reserve faces a tough puzzle: how to control high inflation without choking economic growth. This policy trap is one of the toughest challenges, and if it's not solved, a US recession won't just be a forecast, it'll be knocking on the door. This negative market mood is a clear warning sign. Without smart solutions, America could be staring down some very bleak economic months ahead. After 90 days of temporary calm, the United States can no longer go back to the old way. The issue with China remains, and without a long-term plan, the crisis will happen again. The first thing that needs to be done is to diversify supply sources. The US cannot keep relying on China to import nearly everything. Now, countries like Mexico, India, Vietnam, and Thailand are becoming alternative choices. However, this cannot be done quickly. To shift the supply chain, businesses have to spend billions of dollars rebuilding transportation systems and customs procedures from scratch. Despite the difficulties, this is the only way to survive if the US does not want to fall into chaos every time there is a disruption. At the same time, domestic production must also be boosted, especially in strategic industries such as semiconductor chips, clean energy, pharmaceuticals, and defense. But making products in the US is not cheap, so the government needs to provide support, and businesses must boldly apply advanced technology and automation to save costs and increase competitiveness. Importantly, the Federal Reserve cannot shoulder the consequences of supply chain issues alone. The root cause lies in trade and fiscal policies. The US needs stable, clear policies that do not change erratically with each administration, so businesses can confidently invest in the long term. The 90-day agreement is only a temporary painkiller. To truly overcome and stand strong against future shocks, the US needs clear vision, determination, and serious investment in a sustainable economy. If it does not change now, the price to pay will be much higher in the future. All eyes are now fixed on this critical 90-day window, Because if the agreement falls apart, a far darker reality will arrive faster than most expect. Should negotiations collapse, the US will have no choice but to reimpose the staggering 145% tariff on Chinese goods, a number that once shocked the entire world. Naturally, China will retaliate fiercely. The two economic giants will not cooperate, but instead fracture the global supply chain into two separate blocks. This would be like an earthquake shaking the foundations of the world economy. First, American manufacturing will grind to a halt. Factories starved of imported materials and equipment will shut down, reduce hours, or lay off workers. Next, prices for goods will soar uncontrollably, slashing consumer purchasing power. Life will become increasingly unaffordable, pushing families deeper into hardship. Unemployment rates will spike, workers will lose their jobs, and the economy will lose its vital momentum. Eventually, economic indicators will hit rock bottom. GDP growth could stall at zero or plunge into negative territory, signaling an impending recession just beyond the horizon. This trade battle is far more than a mere tariff war. It is a fight for the survival of the world's largest economy. If the US fails in the next 90 days, the fallout won't just be a short-term loss. It could reshape the global order for years to come. And when that happens, the cost will be paid not only by Americans, but by the entire world. Imagine America as a ship, struggling amidst a fierce storm. Its hull is cracked, water is flooding in, and there are only 90 days left to patch it before it sinks completely. This is the narrow window granted by the temporary tariff truce with China. 3 months to decide whether the economy will survive or collapse. It sounds like plenty of time, but in today's chaos, 90 days is barely enough. No one can move factories out of China in just a few weeks. No one can revive a dying transport sector with a single call. Prices keep rising, goods remain scarce, and consumers stay uneasy. But these 3 months are not meaningless. They are the last chance to ease tensions and avoid a full-blown trade war. It's also the moment for America to start doing what it should have done long ago: diversify supply chains, invest in domestic manufacturing, and build a sustainable strategy that goes beyond short-term firefighting. The question is, can America survive this storm? The answer, it can, if it acts now. If the country keeps chasing crisis after crisis without fundamental change, these 90 days will only be a stepping stone to a decade-long recession. The clock is ticking. The ship will either sink or be saved. The choice is in America's hands.